James Carter stood in his glass-walled office on the 42nd floor, surveying the city sprawling beneath him like a conquered kingdom. The afternoon sun gleamed off his gold watch, a $20,000 Patek Philippe that he wore specifically for moments like these. When he needed to remind himself of his worth, his latest real estate deal had just closed, a $50 million development that would transform the downtown skyline. The contracts lay scattered across his mahogany desk, each signature representing another victory in his relentless climb to the top. But today's triumph felt hollow. 3 years had passed since his divorce from Laura, and instead of the satisfaction he'd expected, he felt only a gnawing resentment that had grown stronger with each passing month. She was supposed to have come crawling back by now, desperate and broken, begging for his forgiveness and support. Instead, the silence from her side of the city had been deafening. "Sir," his assistant Emily peered through the doorway, "the charity gala preparations are almost complete. The final guest list needs your approval." James's lips curved into a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Perfect timing. Emily, there's one more name I want to add." He picked up his Mont Blanc pen, another symbol of his success, and wrote with deliberate precision, "Laura Bennett." The ink seemed to burn against the cream-colored paper as memories flooded back. 3 years ago, she'd been nothing but a struggling single mother, scraping by after their divorce. He remembered her tears, her desperate pleas for higher alimony, her broken voice when she'd begged him not to abandon their children. The satisfaction of that memory warmed him more than any business victory ever could. "Make sure this one gets a personal touch," he instructed Emily, sliding the paper across his desk. "Hand-delivered. Gold-embossed invitation. Include a handwritten note." He paused, savoring the moment. "Right. Hope you can make it, Elle. It would mean so much to see how you're doing these days. Sign it with my full name." Emily nodded, though something flickered across her expression, doubt, perhaps, or disapproval. James dismissed it immediately. She was paid to execute his orders, not judge them. Alone again, James walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows and imagined the scene. Laura would arrive at his mansion, the same mansion where they'd once lived as husband and wife, probably wearing some discount dress from a department store, her children in tow because she couldn't afford a babysitter. He'd make sure she was seated prominently, where everyone could see her. Then, during his speech about supporting single mothers in need, he'd turn the spotlight on her, forcing her to stand while he recounted her inspiring story of struggle and perseverance. The crowd would see exactly what she'd become without him, a charity case. The plan was flawless. Laura had always been too proud, too dignified to make a scene in public. She'd have to smile and endure every moment of her humiliation. Across the city, in a converted warehouse that housed Bennett Architectural Design, Laura stood before a wall of blueprints, her dark eyes tracing the clean lines of her latest project. Sunlight streamed through the industrial windows, catching the natural highlights in her hair and illuminating the focused intensity that had always been her trademark. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her curves perfectly, paired with heels that clicked authoritatively against the polished concrete floors as she moved between drafting tables. Laura, her assistant Sophie, approached hesitantly. "A courier just delivered this for you. Said it was urgent." The envelope felt heavy in Laura's hands, its weight seeming disproportionate to its size. Gold embossing spelled out her name in elegant script, and she recognized the address immediately. Her breath caught in her throat as she tore it open, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the invitation. "The James Carter Foundation cordially invites you to our annual charity gala." The words blurred together as she reached the handwritten note at the bottom. James's familiar scrawl sent ice through her veins. "Hope you can make it, Elle. It would mean so much to see how you're doing these days." The invitation slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. The sight of James's familiar handwriting transported her instantly. She was 29 again, standing in that same mansion while James packed his bags, his voice cold and clinical as he explained why their marriage was over. "You'll never amount to anything without me, Laura. You're just a nobody who got lucky when I married you. Don't forget that when you're struggling to feed our kids." The memory hit her with unexpected force, and she gripped the edge of her drafting table to steady herself. Her chest tightened as familiar doubts crept in. James's voice whispering that maybe her success was just an illusion, that she was still that broken woman he'd left behind. "Laura, are you all right?" Sophie's concerned voice seemed to come from very far away. Before she could answer, the front door chimed, and footsteps echoed across the warehouse floor. Laura didn't need to look up to know who it was. She'd memorized the sound of Michael's walk months ago. The confident but unhurried pace that somehow managed to convey strength and gentleness in equal measure. "I brought lunch from that Thai place you love." Michael's warm voice filled the space, carrying with it the security that had become her anchor over the past 2 years. "And coffee that's actually worth drinking, not whatever industrial sludge you've been." He stopped mid-sentence, and Laura knew he'd seen her face. In 3 quick strides, he was beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders as he turned her to face him. His dark eyes that had seen her at her weakest moments and somehow found her beautiful, anyway searched her face with the kind of attention that still made her heart skip. "What happened?" The question was soft but carried an undertone that suggested he was prepared to level buildings if necessary to protect her. Laura gestured helplessly toward the invitation on the floor. Michael's jaw tightened as he read it, his protective instincts evident in the way his free hand clenched into a fist. "That bastard," he said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "He's planning something." "It's a charity gala," Laura said, trying to inject lightness into her tone and failing completely. "Maybe he's changed. Maybe he genuinely wants to." "Laura." Michael cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. "Look at me. This man spent 2 years tearing you down, convincing you that you were worthless without him. He abandoned you and the twins without a backward glance. Men like that don't change. They just find new ways to inflict damage." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his unwavering belief in her. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just..." Seeing his handwriting again, remembering that house, she shuddered. "God, Michael, what if he's right? What if I'm still just pretending to be someone I'm not?" Michael's expression shifted, a mix of tenderness and fierce determination that made her breath catch. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" He gestured toward the wall of blueprints behind them. "I see the woman who designed the Wilson Cultural Center that opened last month, the woman who revolutionized sustainable housing in the Parkside development, the woman who built this business from nothing and now employs 12 people." His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer. "But more than that, I see the mother who raises 2 incredible boys with patience and wisdom. I see the woman who makes me coffee in the morning because she knows I'm useless before caffeine. I see the person who holds me when I have nightmares about my father's death, who never makes me feel weak for needing comfort." Laura's resolve began to solidify as she absorbed his words. But Michael wasn't finished. "James sees what he wants to see a woman he can control and diminish. But I see the truth. You're the strongest person I know, and you deserve to be celebrated, not humiliated." He picked up the invitation, his expression thoughtful. "The question is, what do you want to do about this?" Laura looked into the eyes of the man who had loved her through panic attacks and self-doubt, who had never once made her feel like anything less than extraordinary. She thought about Ethan and Noah at home, probably doing homework at the kitchen table they'd picked out together. Secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected, she thought about the life she'd built, not the life James had granted her, but the life she'd created with her own hands and heart. "I want to go," she said quietly, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "But not alone, and not to prove anything to him." She met Michael's eyes steadily. "I want to go because I'm not afraid of him anymore. I want to show myself that his opinion of me doesn't matter." Michael's smile was radiant with pride and love. "Then we'll go, all of us, as a family." The word family wrapped around her like a warm embrace, filling the spaces that James's cruelty had once hollowed out. Chapter 2. The Man Who Changed Everything. 2 years earlier, the rain hammered against the windows of Bennett Architectural Design with the fury of a storm that had been building all day. Laura glanced at her watch, 9:47 p.m., and sighed as she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. The warehouse office was empty except for her, the cleaning crew having finished hours ago. She should have been home helping Ethan and Noah with their bedtime routine, but the Wilson project deadline was tomorrow, and she couldn't afford to lose this client. Her 6-month-old business was barely surviving. After launching her firm following the divorce, she was learning the harsh reality that talent didn't automatically translate to paying clients. James's parting words echoed in her mind during moments like these. "You'll be back begging for help within a year. You can't make it without me." The front door chimed, startling her from her thoughts. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could make out a tall figure struggling with an umbrella that had clearly lost the battle against the wind. The man stepped inside, water dripping from his dark hair and expensive suit, and Laura's breath caught. He was stunning in the way that successful men often were not just handsome, but carrying himself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from never having to prove his worth to anyone. His eyes, a deep brown that seemed to hold flecks of gold in the overhead lighting, scanned the space with obvious appreciation before settling on her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rich and warm despite his obvious discomfort at being soaked. "I know it's late, but I saw the lights on and thought, are you Laura Bennett?" She stood slowly, suddenly conscious of her bare feet. She'd kicked off her heels hours ago, and her hair was probably a disaster. "Yes, that's me. Though we're technically closed. I'm Michael Evans," he said, extending his hand. When she took it, she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Your work on the Parkside housing project caught my attention." Laura blinked in surprise. The Parkside project had been one of her first major commissions after the divorce, a sustainable housing development that she'd poured her heart into. It had won several architectural awards, but she'd assumed the recognition was mainly local. "You know about Parkside?" she asked, genuinely curious now. Michael's smile transformed his entire face, making him seem less intimidating and infinitely more approachable. "I know about a lot of your work, actually. The community center on 3rd Avenue, the library renovation downtown. You have a gift for making sustainable design feel warm and inviting, instead of cold and clinical." Heat crept up Laura's neck. No one had ever spoken about her work with such genuine appreciation, certainly not James, who had always dismissed her architecture as playing with dollhouses. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know. Would you like some coffee? You look like you could use something warm." "I'd love that," Michael replied, and something in his tone suggested he meant more than just the coffee. As Laura busied herself with the coffee maker, an ancient machine that required patience and prayer in equal measure, Michael walked through her workspace, studying the blueprints and models scattered across various tables. She found herself stealing glances at him, noting the way he examined each project with genuine interest rather than the cursory attention most clients gave her work. "Tell me about this one," he said, stopping in front of her latest design, a mixed-use development that incorporated green spaces and affordable housing in a way that didn't sacrifice aesthetics for functionality. "It's just a concept piece," Laura admitted, handing him a steaming mug. "Something I work on when I have spare time, which isn't often these days." Michael studied the blueprints with the intensity of someone who understood what he was looking at. "This is brilliant," he said finally. "The way you've integrated the commercial and residential spaces while maintaining privacy and community, it's exactly what the city needs." "You sound like you know architecture," Laura observed, settling into the chair across from him. "I know enough to recognize genius when I see it," Michael replied, his eyes meeting hers over his coffee cup. "I'm actually here because I need an architect for a new project. My company is expanding, and I want something that makes a statement about our values, not just our profits." Laura felt her heart skip. A major commission could change everything for her struggling firm. "What kind of company? Tech? Development?" "We focus on sustainable innovation, clean energy solutions mostly." Michael leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed despite the formal setting. "I could have gone with any of the big firms in the city, but I wanted someone who understands that buildings should serve communities, not just investors." They talked for 3 hours. The storm continued to rage outside. But inside the warmth of the office, Laura found herself opening up in ways she hadn't since the divorce. Michael listened with the kind of attention that made her feel like the most fascinating person in the world. He asked thoughtful questions about her design philosophy, her inspiration for the Parkside project, her vision for sustainable urban development. When she mentioned the twins almost accidentally while explaining why she chose family-friendly elements in her designs, Michael's entire demeanor shifted. His smile became softer, more personal. "How old are they?" he asked. "6," Laura replied, then found herself adding, "They're everything to me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm crazy trying to build a business while raising them alone." "But you're not alone," Michael said quietly. "You have them, and they have you. That's not small. That's everything." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "You sound like you speak from experience." Michael's expression grew distant for a moment. "My father died when I was 8. My mother raised me alone, and she was incredible. Watching her build a life for us, seeing her strength every day, it shaped who I became. Your boys are lucky to have you." The sincerity in his voice nearly brought tears to her eyes. James had always made her feel like a burden when it came to the children, constantly complaining about how motherhood had changed her, made her less available to cater to his needs. "I should let you get home to them," Michael said, glancing at his watch. "But I hope you'll consider taking on my project. I think we could create something remarkable together." As he gathered his coat and prepared to brave the storm again, Laura found herself not wanting the evening to end. "Michael," she called as he reached the door. "Why me? Really, you could have anyone." He turned back, and the look he gave her was so intense it made her pulse quicken. "Because your buildings tell stories about the people who live in them. They're not just structures. They're homes, communities, places where families grow and dreams take root." He paused, his hand on the door handle. "And because any woman who can create something that beautiful while raising 2 children alone is someone I want to know better." The door closed behind him, leaving Laura alone with the scent of his cologne and the echoes of words that felt like a promise. 3 months later, after countless meetings that felt more like dates, after late-night calls about blueprint revisions that somehow turned into conversations about everything and nothing, after Michael had quietly helped her land 2 more major clients without ever making her feel indebted, they had their first kiss. It happened during a picnic with the twins in Parkside Park. Ethan had been struggling with a broken toy airplane, growing increasingly frustrated as the pieces refused to fit together. James would have told him to stop crying and figure it out himself. But Michael knelt beside the little boy with infinite patience, his large hands gentle as he helped sort through the pieces. "Sometimes, when things are broken, we need to look at them differently," Michael had said softly, showing Ethan how to approach the problem from a new angle. "See, it just needed someone to believe it could fly again." Watching this powerful, successful man treat her son with such tenderness and respect, Laura felt something inside her chest bloom like flowers after a long winter. When Michael looked up and caught her staring, the intensity in his eyes made her knees weak. Later, after the boys had fallen asleep during the drive home, Michael walked her to the door of her small apartment. The porch light cast golden shadows across his face as he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Laura," he said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion she was afraid to name, "I need you to know this isn't just about the project anymore. It hasn't been for a long time." "I know," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "For me either." When he kissed her, it was with a reverence that made her feel precious, cherished in a way she'd never experienced. His hands framed her face as if she were something delicate and infinitely valuable. And when they finally broke apart, she could see in his eyes that this was the beginning of something that would change everything. "I love you," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I love your strength, your talent, your heart. I love the way you make me want to be better than I am. And I love those 2 incredible boys of yours as if they were my own." Standing there on her porch with the man who had seen all her broken pieces and helped her believe she could fly again, Laura finally understood what love was supposed to feel like. It felt like coming home. Chapter 3. Love's True Foundation. The evening after receiving James's invitation, Laura stood on the balcony of Michael's penthouse, her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had long since gone cold. The city sprawled beneath her, a tapestry of lights that usually brought her peace. Tonight, however, her mind was a whirlwind of memories she'd thought she'd buried forever. "You're thinking too loud." Michael's voice came from behind her, warm and amused. She felt his arms slide around her waist, his chest solid and reassuring against her back. I can hear the gears turning from inside. Sorry, she murmured, leaning into his embrace. I keep thinking about what he wrote. See how you're doing these days like. He expects to find me broken down and desperate. Michael's arms tightened around her. And that bothers you because part of me is terrified that he's right. The admission escaped before she could stop it, and she felt Michael's entire body tense behind her. What if I'm just playing dress-up? What if, underneath all this success, I'm still that woman who couldn't even stand up for herself? Michael turned her in his arms, his dark eyes fierce with an emotion that took her breath away. Look at me, Laura. Really look at me. When she met his gaze, he continued, his voice low and intense. Do you trust me? With my life, she replied without hesitation. Then trust me when I tell you something. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. James didn't just hurt you. He tried to rewrite your story. He wanted you to believe that your worth came from him, that your achievements were gifts he gave you rather than victories you earned. Tears pricked at her eyes as his words hit their mark. He used to say I was just a nobody who got lucky, that without him I'd end up back where I started nowhere. And you believed him? It wasn't a question. And Laura nodded, shame burning in her chest. I still believe him sometimes, when I'm tired, or when a client rejects a proposal, or when the twins ask about their father. James's voice is right there, reminding me that I'm not enough. Michael's expression shifted, and suddenly she could see the billionaire businessman beneath the loving partner, the man who had built an empire through sheer force of will and strategic brilliance. Come with me, he said, taking her hand. There's something I need to show you. He led her inside to his home office, a space she'd always loved for its floor-to-ceiling windows and the way the city lights painted patterns on the hardwood floors. But tonight, Michael moved to his desk and pulled out a thick portfolio she'd never seen before. What's this? She asked as he opened it. Your real story, he replied, and her breath caught as she saw the first page. It was a photograph of the Wilson Cultural Center, the building she designed 2 years ago. But this wasn't the standard publicity shot she'd seen in architectural magazines. This was taken at golden hour, with families streaming in and out of the entrance, children laughing on the steps, elderly couples holding hands as they climbed toward the doors. The building looked alive, exactly as she'd envisioned it when she'd first sketched the plans. Keep looking, Michael urged softly. The next page showed the Parkside housing development from an aerial view. She could see the green spaces she'd integrated, the way the buildings formed a natural community around shared courtyards, where children played and neighbors gathered. Gardens bloomed on rooftops, and solar panels gleamed in the sunlight. Page after page revealed her work, not just the buildings themselves, but the life they'd created. The library renovation, where teenagers studied after school and elderly men played chess by the windows. The community center, where mothers brought their children for swimming lessons and art classes. The affordable housing complex, where single parents like she'd once been could raise their families with dignity and hope. Michael, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, how did you get all these? I've been documenting your impact for 2 years, he said, his own voice rough. Every building you've designed has changed lives, Laura. Families have homes because of you. Children have safe places to learn and play because of you. Communities have gathered and grown because of your vision. She turned the page and gasped. It was a letter from Sarah Thompson, a single mother who lived in the Parkside development. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Dear Miss Bennett, you probably don't remember me, but you visited our site during construction and helped my daughter pick out the color for our front door. She's 8 now, and every day when she comes home from school, she tells me our house is the prettiest on the block. Thank you for making us feel like we deserve beautiful things. There are 47 more letters like that, Michael said quietly. From families, community leaders, teachers, social workers, all talking about how your buildings changed their lives for the better. Laura's hands shook as she turned through more pages. Thank you notes from the Children's Library program, photos of wedding receptions held in the community center's rooftop garden, articles about how the sustainable features of her buildings were being replicated across the country. This is who you really are, Michael said, moving to stand behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. Not James's version the truth. You're a woman who sees the potential in empty lots and broken communities, and turns them into places where love grows. You're an architect of hope, Laura. The tears came then, years of self-doubt and internalized criticism washing away as she absorbed the evidence of her own impact. I can't believe you collected all of this. I collect things that are precious to me, Michael replied, turning her chair so she faced him. He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. Your talent, your heart, your strength, they're all precious to me, but more than that, they're precious to the world. Looking into his eyes, Laura felt the last of James's poisonous words lose their hold on her heart. This incredible, powerful, brilliant man saw her, not as a charity case or a broken thing to be fixed, but as a force of nature to be celebrated. I love you, she said, the words carrying more weight than they ever had before. Not just for this, but for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. Michael's smile was radiant as he stood and pulled her to her feet. I love you too. All of you, your ambition, your vulnerability, your fierce protection of the people you love. I love the way you hum while you work and how you cry during sappy commercials. I love watching you teach the twins to be strong and kind. When he kissed her, it was with a passion that spoke of 2 years of building trust, of nights spent talking until dawn, of quiet moments stolen between meetings and bedtime stories. Laura melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she poured all her gratitude and love and desire into the kiss. Take me to bed, she whispered against his lips, and she felt his sharp intake of breath. Are you sure? He asked, his voice strained with the effort of giving her space to choose. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Their lovemaking that night was different from all the times before. There was a claiming in it, a celebration of the woman she'd finally allowed herself to be. Michael worshipped her body with the same reverence he showed her work, mapping every curve and valley with his hands and mouth until she was trembling with need. When he moved over her, his eyes locked on hers, she felt the final walls around her heart crumble. I see you, he whispered as he joined with her, and she knew he meant more than just the physical. I see all of you, and you're magnificent. Later, as they lay tangled in silk sheets with the city lights painting silver patterns across their skin, Michael traced lazy circles on her bare shoulder. Marry me, he said suddenly, and Laura's heart stopped. She turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign that he was caught up in the emotion of the moment. But his expression was steady, determined, full of a love that took her breath away. Michael, I know it's sudden, he said, sitting up and reaching for something in his nightstand drawer. Well, actually, it's not sudden at all. I've been carrying this around for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. The ring box was small and elegant, and when he opened it, Laura gasped. The diamond was beautiful, not ostentatiously large, but perfectly cut and set in a band that was clearly designed specifically for her. It was elegant and strong and timeless, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. I had it made to match the necklace your grandmother left you, Michael explained, his voice soft. The one you wear when you're nervous about big presentations. I wanted something that would remind you of where you came from and how far you've traveled. It's perfect, she breathed, then looked up at him with tears in her eyes. But the boys are the reason I want to do this, right? Michael finished. I want to ask them for permission first. I want them to know that marrying you means choosing to be their father in every way that matters. I want us to be a real family legally, officially, and forever. The next morning, over pancakes that Michael had burned only slightly, he knelt beside the twins' chairs with a solemnity that made even 6-year-old Noah stop fidgeting. Ethan, Noah, he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, I have something very important to ask you both. The boys exchanged glances, then turned their full attention to the man who had been reading them bedtime stories and helping with homework for the past 2 years. I love your mama very much, Michael continued, and I love both of you very much. I'd like to ask her to marry me, but first I need to know. Would it be okay with you if I became your daddy officially, if we all became a real family? Ethan, ever the thoughtful older twin, considered this seriously. Would you still help me with my science projects? Every single one, Michael promised. And you'd still make us those chocolate chip pancakes on Sunday mornings? Noah added, his eyes bright with hope. As many Sundays as you want. The boys looked at each other again. having one of those silent conversations that twins seem to master in the womb. Finally, Ethan nodded decisively. "Yes," he said. "We want you to be our daddy for real." Noah launched himself into Michael's arms. "Can we call you Daddy at school too, instead of Mr. Michael?" "I would be honored," Michael replied, his voice thick with emotion as he hugged both boys. When he turned to Laura with the ring, she was already crying happy tears. "Laura Bennett," he said formally, though his smile was pure joy. "Will you marry me and make us a family?" "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes, to all of it." As the ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit, because Michael paid attention to every detail, Laura felt the last piece of her broken heart heal completely. That evening, as they planned their strategy for James's gala, she wasn't thinking about revenge or proving anything to her ex-husband. She was thinking about walking into that room with her head high, her hand in Michael's, and her children by her side, not because she had something to prove, but because she finally knew her own worth. Chapter 4. Preparation and Revelation. The boutique on Fifth Avenue was the kind of place Laura had always admired from the outside, but never imagined entering. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over racks of designer gowns, and the sales associates moved with the quiet efficiency of people accustomed to serving clients who considered money no object. As Michael guided her through the door with a protective hand on her back, Laura felt simultaneously grateful for his gesture and uncomfortable with the extravagance. "Michael, this is too much," she murmured, taking in the price tags that made her architect's salary seem quaint. "I have dresses that would be perfectly appropriate." "You have beautiful dresses," he agreed, his voice warm with affection. "But tonight isn't about appropriate. Tonight is about you walking into that room and owning it completely." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips to press a soft kiss to her new engagement ring. "Besides, I have a confession to make, and I suspect you're going to need some retail therapy afterward." Before Laura could ask what he meant, an elegant woman with silver hair and knowing eyes approached them. "Mr. Evans," she said with genuine warmth, "everything is ready, just as you requested." "Thank you, Clara." "Laura, this is Clara Rossi. She's going to help you find something perfect for tonight." Clara's smile was radiant as she turned to Laura. "Miss Bennett, it's such an honor to meet you. I've been following your work for years. My daughter lives in the Parkside development, and she absolutely loves it." "You know my work?" Laura asked, surprised. "Of course. The Wilson Cultural Center is my grandson's favorite place in the city. He takes art classes there every Saturday." Clara gestured toward a private sitting area where champagne waited on ice and several gowns hung on an elegant rack. "Mr. Evans called ahead with very specific instructions about what would complement your coloring and style." As Clara began showing her options, each dress more stunning than the last, Laura found herself relaxing into the experience. The champagne helped, but more than that, she was touched by the obvious care Michael had put into this. Every gown was in her preferred style, elegant but not ostentatious, sophisticated but still allowing her personality to shine through. "This one," Clara said, lifting a midnight blue gown that seemed to shimmer with its own light. "Mr. Evans was very specific about this particular shade. He said, it matches her eyes when she's passionate about a project." Laura's breath caught. The dress was perfection, a classic silhouette with modern details, sophisticated enough for any high society event, but with an edge that was purely her own. As Clara helped her into it, she caught sight of herself in the three-way mirror and felt a jolt of recognition. This wasn't Laura playing dress-up. This was Laura as she was meant to be seen. "You look stunning," Michael said from behind her, and she turned to find him watching her with an expression of pure adoration. "But then again, you always do." "Michael," she said softly, about this confession. His expression grew serious, and he gestured for Clara to give them privacy. Once they were alone, he took Laura's hands in his thumbs stroking over her knuckles in the nervous gesture she'd learned, meant he was about to say something difficult. "There's something I need to tell you about your business," he began, and immediately Laura's stomach clenched with worry. "About how you've gotten some of your major contracts over the past 2 years." "What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her was already beginning to suspect. Michael took a deep breath. "The Wilson Cultural Center, the downtown library renovation, the sustainable housing project on the west side, They were all commissioned through shell companies that I own. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? I never interfered with your work, he said quickly, his voice urgent. I never influenced your designs or gave you any advantage in the actual bidding process. But I made sure those projects existed in the first place. I created the opportunities and then let your talent speak for itself. Laura stared at him, feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. You've been manipulating my career for 2 years? No, Michael said firmly, stepping closer. I've been creating platforms for your brilliance. There's a difference. Is there? She asked, her voice rising slightly. Michael, those projects, they're the foundation of my reputation. If people find out, they won't find out because there's nothing to find out. He interrupted. Every single contract was awarded based on your proposals, your vision, your expertise. I just made sure the right people knew you existed. Laura turned away from him, her mind reeling. Part of her was furious at the deception, but another part she was ashamed to acknowledge, was relieved to know that her success hadn't come purely from her own struggles. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do that? Because I watched you work yourself to exhaustion trying to get people to see what I saw from the moment I met you, Michael replied. His voice rough with emotion. Because I fell in love with your talent before I fell in love with you, and after we started dating, I couldn't stand watching you struggle for opportunities you deserved when I had the resources to help create them. He moved to stand behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Because I fell in love with your talent before I fell in love with you, and I couldn't stand watching you struggle to get opportunities you deserved. But you lied to me, she said quietly. I did, he admitted, and I've regretted it every day since. But Laura, look at what you've created. Look at the families who have homes because of your vision, the children who have safe places to learn and play, the communities that have been transformed by your work. That's all you, your heart, your skill, your dedication. Laura closed her eyes, trying to process the revelation. The Wilson Center won 3 architectural awards and has been featured in 5 international magazines. The Parkside development has a 6-month waiting list and has been replicated in 4 other cities. The library renovation increased community engagement by 300%. Michael's voice was gentle but insistent. Those aren't the results of manipulation, Laura. Those are the results of genius being given the chance to shine. She turned to face him, studying his expression. There was guilt there, and regret. But underneath it all was the unwavering love and admiration she'd come to depend on. I'm still angry with you, she said finally. I know. You have every right to be. But I also understand why you did it. She reached up to cup his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. You weren't trying to control me or make me dependent on you. You were trying to protect me. I was trying to love you, he said simply. Maybe not in the smartest way, but it was love. Laura stood on her toes and kissed him softly. Next time you want to secretly support my career, maybe run it by me first. Michael's relief was palpable. Does this mean you forgive me? It means I love you, she replied, even when you're an overprotective billionaire who thinks he knows what's best for everyone. Especially then, he murmured against her lips, and she laughed despite herself. Across town, James Carter was putting the finishing touches on his own preparations for the evening. His penthouse apartment was a monument to his success: marble floors, designer furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased his commanding view of the city. But tonight, the space felt more like a war room than a home. Spread across his dining table were photographs and documents that represented months of careful research, pictures of Laura, taken with a telephoto lens as she entered and exited various buildings around the city, financial records he'd obtained through questionable means, showing the modest income from her architectural firm, school enrollment documents for the twins that listed her as a single mother. Perfect, he murmured to himself, studying a particularly unflattering shot of Laura, looking exhausted as she left her office late one evening. This is exactly the image I need. His assistant Emily had been working overtime to ensure tonight's event would be flawless. At least, flawless for James's purposes. The photographer he'd hired was already at the mansion, setting up equipment to capture what James expected would be the most satisfying moment of his life. The seating chart had been arranged to place Laura at a table near the front, where everyone could see her clearly during his speech. The speech itself was a masterpiece of condescending sympathy. James had crafted every word to sound charitable and supportive, while actually highlighting Laura's struggles and failures. He would praise her courage in trying to make it on her own, her determination despite her obvious limitations, her devotion to her children, even though she couldn't provide them with the lifestyle they'd had during the marriage. The crowd would eat it up. Wealthy philanthropists loved stories of noble struggle, especially when those stories made them feel generous and enlightened. They would applaud Laura's inspiring journey, never realizing they were witnessing her public humiliation. James's phone buzzed with a text from his business partner, Martinez. "Need to talk soon. Problems with the city contracts." He dismissed the message with barely a glance. Whatever Martinez was worried about could wait until after tonight. Nothing was going to distract him from savoring Laura's downfall. He moved to his closet and selected his most expensive tuxedo Armani, custom-tailored, with cufflinks that had cost more than most people's monthly salary. Tonight, he would be king of his own kingdom, dispensing charity and condescension in equal measure. As he adjusted his bow tie in the mirror, James allowed himself to imagine the moment when Laura would be forced to stand and acknowledge his generosity. He could picture her face, the embarrassment, the gratitude, the recognition that she would never be anything more than what he had made her. "Enjoy your last night of dignity," he said to her imagined reflection. "Tomorrow, the whole city will know exactly where you belong." Meanwhile, back at the boutique, Michael was watching Laura model accessories with the same intensity he brought to billion-dollar business deals. Every choice mattered tonight, not because they were trying to impress anyone, but because Laura deserved to feel as magnificent as she truly was. The sapphire earrings, he decided, as Clara presented several options. They match her ring. "Excellent choice," Clara agreed. "And for her hair?" "Up," Laura said decisively, catching Michael's eye in the mirror. "I want to look like exactly who I am, a successful architect, a devoted mother, and a woman who has nothing to hide." Michael's smile was filled with pride and love. "Then that's exactly how you'll look." As they prepared to leave the boutique, Michael's phone buzzed with a message from his head of security. "Background check on James Carter complete. You're going to want to see this before tonight." Michael's jaw tightened as he read the preview of information that would soon change everything. James's financial empire was built on a foundation of lies, stolen contracts, and illegal dealings that were about to come crashing down. But that was James's problem. Tonight was about Laura, about celebrating the woman she'd become and the family they were building together. Everything else was just details. Chapter 5. The gala begins. The Carter mansion sat like a crown jewel in the hills overlooking the city, its neoclassical columns and manicured gardens illuminated by thousands of twinkling lights. As their limousine wound up the circular drive, Laura felt her breath catch at the sight of the home where she'd once lived as James's wife. From the outside, it looked exactly the same, imposing, elegant, and somehow cold, despite all its grandeur. But she was different now. The woman who had fled this place 3 years ago, broken and defeated, no longer existed. In her place sat a successful architect, a devoted mother, and a woman deeply in love. "You okay, beautiful?" Michael asked softly, his hand finding hers in the dark interior of the car. His thumb traced gentle circles over her knuckles, a gesture that had become their private signal of support and love. "I'm perfect," Laura replied. And she meant it. Gone was the nervous woman who had received James's invitation 4 days ago. In her place sat a confident architect, a devoted mother, and a woman deeply in love. The midnight blue gown flowed around her like liquid starlight, and the sapphire earrings caught the light streaming through the car windows. "Mama, you look like a princess," Noah said from the back seat, his 8-year-old eyes wide with admiration. He and Ethan were dressed in miniature tuxedos that made them look like tiny gentlemen, their hair carefully styled and their bow ties perfectly straight. "And you two look like princes," Laura replied, leaning over to straighten Ethan's bow tie. "Remember what we talked about. Stay close. Use our best manners. And if anyone asks uncomfortable questions, we say, 'That's between our parents,'" Ethan recited dutifully. Despite being only minutes older than his twin, he'd always been the more serious of the two. "And remember," Michael added, his voice warm with affection, "you're my sons tonight. If anyone treats you with anything less than respect, you find me immediately." Both boys beamed at being called Michael's sons. Over the past 2 years, they'd grown to love this man who read them bedtime stories, helped with homework, and never once made them feel like burdens the way their biological father had. The limousine glided to a stop in front of the mansion's grand entrance, where other elegant vehicles were depositing guests in evening wear. A red carpet led from the circular drive to the front doors, flanked by photographers and society reporters documenting the city's elite at play. "Ready?" Michael asked. But he was looking at all three of them, not just Laura, but the twins as well. It was one of the things she loved most about him. His instinctive understanding that they were a package deal, a family unit that stood or fell together. "Ready," Laura confirmed, accepting Michael's hand as he helped her from the car. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. As Laura emerged into the soft evening light, conversations stopped, and heads turned. This wasn't the struggling single mother James remembered. This was a woman who commanded attention simply by existing. Her posture was regal, her smile confident, and the love radiating between her and her family was impossible to miss. Michael stepped beside her, devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, and offered his arm with the kind of old-world gallantry that made every woman present sigh with envy. The twins flanked them like little bodyguards, their chins held high, and their eyes bright with excitement. "Mr. Evans!" Several voices called out from the crowd of photographers. Michael was well known in business circles but rarely attended social events, making his presence tonight newsworthy in itself. "Who's the lucky lady?" someone shouted, and Michael's smile was radiant with pride. "This is my fiancée, Laura Bennett," he announced clearly, his voice carrying across the crowd. "And these are our sons, Ethan and Noah." The casual way he claimed the twins as his own made Laura's heart swell with love. Several reporters scribbled notes, recognizing Laura's name from architectural awards and magazine features. As they walked up the red carpet, Laura caught sight of James through the mansion's front windows. He was standing in the foyer, clearly positioned to get the first look at arrivals, and his expression of smug anticipation was rapidly shifting to shock, and then something that looked suspiciously like panic. "I think someone just realized his plan might have a few flaws," Michael murmured in her ear, his voice touched with dark amusement. "Let's not gloat," Laura replied, though she couldn't quite suppress her own smile. "Let's just be ourselves and let that speak for itself." The mansion's interior was exactly as Laura remembered: soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that cost more than most people's houses. But tonight, seeing it through different eyes, she realized how cold and impersonal it all felt. There was no warmth here, no sense of home or family. It was beautiful, but it was empty. "Mrs. Carter?" The voice made her freeze until she realized the older woman approaching was talking to someone else entirely. She wasn't Mrs. Carter anymore, hadn't been for 3 years. Tonight, she was Laura Bennett, soon to be Laura Evans. And that thought filled her with quiet joy. Laura! A familiar voice made her turn, and she found herself face to face with Margaret Wilson, the cultural center director whose building Laura had designed. "How wonderful to see you." Laura's smile was genuine and warm as she embraced the older woman. "Margaret, how is the center doing?" "Thriving beyond our wildest dreams," Margaret replied enthusiastically. "The children's programs are booked solid, and we've had to expand the community outreach twice. You created something truly magical." Michael stepped forward, and Laura made introductions. "Margaret Wilson, this is my fiancé, Michael Evans, and our sons, Ethan and Noah." "Mr. Evans," Margaret said with obvious recognition, "I believe I have you to thank for making that project possible in the first place." "All I did was provide funding," Michael replied graciously. Laura's vision brought it to life. As they chatted, more people began to gravitate toward their group. Laura was surprised to discover how many of the guests were familiar with her work. Apparently, her reputation in the city was stronger than she'd realized. Architects, city planners, and community leaders all wanted to discuss her projects, praise her innovative approaches to sustainable design, and congratulate her on her recent engagement. The twins, meanwhile, were being their charming selves. Noah had struck up a conversation with an elderly gentleman about baseball, while Ethan was explaining to a fascinated group of women how solar panels work. Both boys were polite, articulate, and clearly adored by their parents. "They're delightful children," commented Eleanor Wentworth, one of the city's most prominent socialites. "You must be very proud." "Every single day," Laura replied, watching as Michael knelt down to Noah's level to help him tie his shoe. The gesture was so naturally paternal that several women nearby practically melted on the spot. "And Mr. Evans seems to be a wonderful father," Eleanor continued. "It's rare to see a man that's successful take such genuine interest in family life. He's the best father they could ask for," Laura said, her voice soft with love. "He chose us, and we chose him. That makes all the difference." Across the room, James watched this tableau with growing alarm. This wasn't going according to plan at all. Laura was supposed to arrive looking desperate and out of place, grateful for his charitable acknowledgement. Instead, she was holding court like a queen, surrounded by admirers and clearly comfortable in a world he'd convinced himself she could never navigate without him. And who was this Michael Evans? James recognized the name from business magazines. The man was worth billions, not millions. How had Laura managed to snare someone like that? The sight of Evans treating her children as his own sons made James's stomach churn with an emotion he refused to name. "Sir." Emily appeared at his elbow, looking nervous. "There's been a development. That reporter from the Tribune is here, and she's asking questions about the foundation's finances. Also, Martinez called again. He says it's urgent." James waved her concerns away impatiently. "Handle it. Tonight is about celebrating our charitable work." "But sire," "I said handle it," James snapped, his eyes never leaving Laura's group. "Nothing is going to ruin tonight." Meanwhile, Laura was discovering that revenge could be as simple as happiness. Every moment of joy she shared with Michael and the twins, every conversation about her successful career, every loving glance between her and her fiancé was proof that James's cruelty had failed to destroy her. "Mama?" Ethan appeared at her side, tugging gently on her dress. "That man over there keeps staring at us. Is that our old daddy?" Laura followed his gaze to where James stood across the room, his expression dark and unreadable. "Yes, sweetheart. That's James. He looks angry," Noah observed, having joined his brother. "Did we do something wrong?" "You did nothing wrong," Michael said firmly, his protective instincts immediately engaged. "Some people just don't like seeing others happy." "That's sad," Noah said, with the simple wisdom of childhood. "We could share our happiness with him if he wanted." "You boys have such good hearts," Laura said, kneeling down to hug them both. "But sometimes people have to find their own happiness. We can't give it to them." As if drawn by their conversation, James finally approached their group. His smile was the same charming one Laura remembered from their early dating days, but now she could see the calculation behind it. "Laura," he said warmly, as if they were old friends rather than bitter ex-spouses. "You look well." "Thank you, James," she replied evenly. "You remember Ethan and Noah, of course." James's gaze flicked dismissively over his biological sons, barely acknowledging their existence. "Boys." His attention immediately shifted to Michael, sizing up this unexpected competition. "And you must be Laura's friend." "Michael Evans," Michael replied, extending his hand with the confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. "Laura's fiancé, and these are my sons." The emphasis on my sons was subtle but unmistakable, and James's composure cracked slightly. "Fiancé? How?" "Sudden." 2 years isn't exactly sudden," Laura said calmly. "Michael, this is James Carter, the twins' biological father." The distinction was clear. James might share DNA with the boys, but Michael was their father in every way that mattered. Around them, the other guests continued their conversations, but Laura could sense the undercurrent of attention focused on this reunion. "Well," James said, his smile becoming strained, "I hope you'll all enjoy the evening. I have some remarks planned that I think you'll find illuminating." As he walked away, Michael's arm tightened protectively around Laura's waist. "Whatever he's planning, we can handle it together." "I know," Laura replied, watching her ex-husband disappear into the crowd. "I'm not the same woman he married, Michael. I'm not even the same woman he divorced. I'm stronger now." "You always were strong," Michael corrected gently. "You just needed someone to help you remember it." The dinner bell chimed, calling guests to their tables, and the Evans family, because that's what they were now, in every way that mattered, walked together into whatever James had planned, secure in their love for each other and ready to face anything as a united front. Chapter 6. The Backfire Begins. The mansion's grand ballroom had been transformed into an elegant dining space, with round tables draped in ivory silk and centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath. Crystal glasses caught the light from the massive chandeliers overhead, and the gentle hum of sophisticated conversation filled the air. Laura found herself seated at a prominent table near the front James's doing, no doubt surrounded by some of the city's most influential philanthropists and business leaders. "Miss Bennett," said Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a prominent pediatrician who sat to Laura's left, "I have to tell you how much my patients love the children's wing you designed for our new clinic. The natural light and the way you incorporated play areas into the waiting room, it's completely changed the experience for the families we serve." "That means everything to me," Laura replied genuinely. "Architecture should serve the people who use it, especially children who might be scared or anxious." Michael watched with quiet pride as Laura effortlessly navigated conversations about her work, her design philosophy, and her vision for sustainable urban development. The twins sat between them, perfectly behaved and occasionally charming nearby guests with their precocious observations about everything, from the floral arrangements to the architectural details of the mansion itself. "Daddy," Ethan whispered to Michael, tugging gently on his sleeve, "is this where Mama used to live?" "Yes, buddy," Michael replied softly, "but that was a long time ago, before you and Noah really knew what home felt like." "Our real home is better," Noah declared with 7-year-old certainty. "It has that big kitchen where we make pancakes on Sunday mornings and the reading nook where you tell us stories." Several guests at nearby tables overheard the exchange and smiled at the obvious affection between Michael and the boys. It was impossible to miss the genuine love that radiated from their family unit, the way they instinctively protected and supported each other. Across the room, James stood at the head table. His jaw clenched as he watched Laura command respect and admiration from some of the city's most influential people. This wasn't the desperate, struggling single mother he'd expected to humiliate. This was a successful, confident woman who clearly belonged in this world, perhaps more than he did himself. "Ladies and gentlemen," James's voice rang out as he stood and tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The conversations gradually died down as all attention focused on their host. "If I could have your attention, please." The room fell silent, and James basked in the moment of having everyone's eyes on him. This was his domain, his night, his chance to remind everyone exactly who held the power here. "Thank you all for joining me for this very special evening," he began, his smile practiced and charming. "The James Carter Foundation has always been committed to supporting those in our community who need a helping hand. And tonight is a celebration of the progress we've made together." Polite applause rippled through the room, and James's confidence grew. "But before we discuss our achievements, I'd like to take a moment to honor someone very special who's with us tonight. Someone whose story perfectly embodies the resilience and determination that our foundation strives to support." Laura felt Michael's hand find hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of solidarity. She could see where this was heading. And surprisingly, she felt no fear, only a calm certainty that whatever James threw at her, she could handle it. "3 years ago," James continued, his voice taking on a tone of practiced sympathy, "I watched someone very close to me face the most difficult challenge of her life. Suddenly finding herself alone, with 2 young children to support and no real career prospects, she could have given up. She could have accepted defeat." The crowd was listening intently now, drawn in by James's storytelling ability. But at the table where Laura sat, several guests were beginning to look uncomfortable. Dr. Gonzalez frowned slightly, clearly recognizing that James was talking about someone present at the gala. "But this remarkable woman," James continued, his eyes finding Laura's across the room, "decided to fight." She took the skills she had, modest though they were, and tried to build something from nothing. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, failures, moments when I'm sure she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Michael's grip on Laura's hand tightened, but she squeezed back reassuringly. She could feel the twins shifting nervously in their chairs, sensing the undercurrent of tension even if they didn't fully understand what was happening. But through sheer determination, James said, his smile becoming more pronounced, and with the help of some very generous benefactors who saw potential in her unique circumstances, she managed to create a small but respectable business. Nothing spectacular, you understand, but enough to provide for her children and maintain her dignity. The condescension in his voice was becoming impossible to miss. Several guests exchanged glances, and Dr. Gonzalez's frown deepened as she realized exactly who James was talking about and how inappropriate his tribute was becoming. And so, James raised his glass, his voice dripping with false warmth. "I'd like to ask everyone to join me in honoring Laura Bennett, my former wife, for her inspiring journey from desperate circumstances to modest success." The pause before modest success was deliberate and cruel, and the scattered applause that followed was hesitant and uncomfortable. James's smile was triumphant as he gestured toward Laura's table. "Laura, please stand so everyone can properly acknowledge your achievements." For a moment, the ballroom was completely silent. This was the moment James had been planning for weeks. Laura's public humiliation, her forced gratitude for his condescending recognition, her acknowledgement that everything she'd accomplished was little more than charity. But when Laura rose from her chair, she did so with a grace and dignity that transformed the entire dynamic of the room. She stood tall in her midnight blue gown, her chin lifted proudly, her eyes calm and steady as they met James's across the crowded space. "Thank you, James," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "It's always illuminating to hear someone else's interpretation of your life story." A ripple of surprised murmurs went through the crowd. This wasn't the grateful, embarrassed response James had expected. "Though I have to say," Laura continued with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes, "your version seems to be missing quite a few important details. For instance, the fact that my modest architectural firm has designed over 30 buildings in this city alone, including the Wilson Cultural Center, which won the National Architecture Award last year." Dr. Gonzalez began to smile, and several other guests nodded in recognition. The Wilson Center was famous throughout the region. Or the fact that the Parkside Sustainable Housing Development, which you described so charmingly, has been featured in Architectural Digest and is being replicated in cities across the country as a model for environmentally conscious urban planning. Now the murmurs were approving, and James's smile was beginning to look strained. "But most importantly," Laura said, her voice warming as her gaze shifted to Michael and the twins, "your story leaves out the best part. The incredible family that chose to love me, not because I needed rescuing, but because they saw my worth even when I'd forgotten it myself." Michael stood smoothly, moving to place a supportive hand on her back, and the twins immediately flanked them. The image they presented was powerful, a strong, united family that radiated love and mutual respect. "So yes," Laura concluded, addressing the room but keeping her eyes on James, "I am grateful for my journey. Every challenge, every setback, every moment of doubt led me to exactly where I belong, surrounded by people who see my achievements as celebrations, not charity cases." The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic, led by Dr. Gonzalez, and quickly spreading throughout the room. James stood frozen at the head table, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage as his carefully planned humiliation backfired spectacularly. "Well said," Eleanor Wentworth called from a nearby table, her voice carrying just enough volume to be overheard. "That was certainly illuminating, though perhaps not in the way our host intended." As Laura sat back down, gracefully accepting congratulations from the guests around her, James struggled to regain control of the situation. "Yes?" "Well," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Laura always was ambitious. Perhaps overly so. Considering her background," the comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and this time the disapproving looks from the crowd were directed squarely at James. Michael's expression darkened dangerously, but before he could respond, Ethan's young voice piped up from their table. "What's wrong with Mama's background?" the 7-year-old asked with genuine confusion. She grew up in a neighborhood where people helped each other, and her grandmama taught her that beautiful things should be for everyone, not just rich people. That's why she builds such pretty houses for families like we used to be. The innocent observation from the child cut through James's pretensions like a knife. Noah nodded earnestly in agreement with his twin. "Mama says the best buildings are the ones that make people feel like they belong somewhere safe and happy." The contrast was stark. Two children defending their mother's values and background with pure, honest love, while their biological father tried to shame her for the very qualities that made her extraordinary. Children often see things more clearly than adults, Dr. Gonzalez observed pointedly, and her comment drew murmurs of agreement from around the room. James realized with growing horror that he was losing control of his own event. The crowd's sympathy had completely shifted to Laura, and his attempts to belittle her were only making him look petty and cruel. His hands shook slightly as he reached for his water glass, his mind scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. "Of course," he said, forcing his smile back into place, "we all know that Laura has had help in achieving her recent successes. It's amazing what the right connections can do for someone's career." The implication was clear and vicious, that Laura's achievements were somehow illegitimate, bought and paid for rather than earned. But before anyone could respond to this latest attack, Michael stood slowly, his movement deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "You're absolutely right, James," Michael said, his dark eyes fixed steadily on his host. "Connections matter enormously in business. The difference is, some of us connect with talent and integrity, while others," he let the sentence hang meaningfully in the air. The room was dead silent now, the tension palpable as two powerful men faced off across the elegant space. But this wasn't a fight between equals. James was revealing himself to be small, petty, and cruel, while Michael radiated the kind of quiet strength that commanded genuine respect. And at the center of it all sat Laura, no longer the victim of James's cruelty, but the catalyst that had exposed his true character to everyone present. The evening was far from over, but already it was clear that James's plan for revenge had become his own undoing. Chapter 7. Daddy's Protection. The tension in the ballroom was thick enough to cut with a knife, as James stood at the head table, his composure cracking like ice under pressure. The polite murmurs of disapproval from the guests were growing louder, and several prominent socialites were openly frowning at their host's increasingly inappropriate behavior. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph, his chance to publicly humiliate the woman who had dared to leave him and build a life without his permission. Instead, Laura sat radiating quiet dignity, while her family surrounded her with obvious love and protection. Michael's presence beside her was like a shield, and even the twins seemed to understand that they were witnessing something important. Their mother standing up to the man who had once tried to make her feel worthless. "You know," James said, his voice taking on a sharper edge as desperation crept in, "it's fascinating how quickly people can reinvent themselves when they find the right sponsor." His eyes moved meaningfully between Laura and Michael, the implication clear and vicious. "Dr." Gonzalez audibly gasped at the crude suggestion, and Eleanor Wentworth set down her wineglass with a sharp clink that rang like a bell in the suddenly silent room. This had gone far beyond poor taste into outright cruelty. But Michael remained calm, his hand steady on Laura's back as he leaned forward slightly. "Are you suggesting that my fiancée's architectural achievements are somehow fraudulent?" His voice was deceptively mild, but there was steel underneath that made several guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm not suggesting anything," James replied with false innocence, though his smile was becoming increasingly manic. "I'm simply observing that success can come in many forms, and sometimes it's less about talent and more about personal relationships." "James." Laura's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood again, and this time there was something regal in her bearing, a quiet authority that silenced the whispers and commanded absolute attention. "I think you've said enough." "Have I?" James's mask was slipping completely now, revealing the bitter, cruel man underneath. "Because I think our guests deserve to know the whole truth about your miraculous transformation. How convenient that you found a wealthy benefactor just when your little business was about to fail." Michael started to rise, his jaw clenched with barely controlled fury. But Laura placed a gentle hand on his arm. This was her fight, and she would finish it on her own terms. "The truth," she said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "The truth is that I spent 2 years of our marriage listening to you tell me I was worthless without you. The truth is that when I finally found the courage to leave, you abandoned your own children because you were more interested in punishing me than loving them." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Whatever the guests had expected from this evening, it wasn't a public airing of such deeply personal and damaging accusations. "And the truth," Laura continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "is that I've spent the last 3 years proving to myself and the world that I am exactly who I always knew I could be. A talented architect, a devoted mother, and a woman worthy of real love." James's face was flushed red now, his hands shaking with rage. He was losing everything, his dignity, his reputation, his carefully constructed image. And in his desperation, he reached for the cruelest weapon in his arsenal. "Real love," he spat, his voice echoing harshly in the silent room. "Is that what you call this charade? Those boys will never be his real sons, Laura. He's playing house with another man's children. And when the novelty wears off—" "Stop." The word came from Ethan, spoken with a clarity and force that shocked everyone present. The 8-year-old stood up in his chair, his small face fierce with an anger that seemed far too mature for his age. "Don't talk about our daddy that way." "Your daddy?" James laughed bitterly, the sound ugly and sharp. "I'm your father, boy. That man is just." "No, you're not." Noah had joined his twin, both boys standing protectively in front of Michael's chair, their young faces blazing with loyalty and love. "Daddy, don't leave. Daddies don't make their families cry. Daddies don't say mean things about the people they're supposed to love." The silence that followed was profound. In the span of 30 seconds, 2 8-year-old children had delivered a more devastating indictment of James's character than any adult could have managed. Their innocent honesty cut through all the pretense and social maneuvering to reveal the simple truth. James Carter was not a father in any way that mattered. "Our daddy reads us stories every night," Ethan continued, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill down his cheeks. "He helps us with our homework and teaches us how to ride bikes and makes us feel safe when we have bad dreams. Our daddy loves Mama the way she deserves to be loved," Noah added, reaching back to touch Michael's hand. "He makes her smile every day and never, ever makes her cry." Michael's composure finally cracked, but not with anger, with overwhelming love and pride. He stood slowly and knelt between the twins, gathering them both into his arms as his own eyes filled with tears. "It's okay, boys," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't have to defend me. I know who I am to you, and you know who you are to me. That's all that matters." "But he was being mean to you," Ethan protested, his small hand fisted in Michael's lapel. "And to Mama. We can't let anyone be mean to our family." "You're right," Michael agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of each boy's head. "Family protects family. But sometimes the best protection is just loving each other so much that mean words can't hurt us." The entire ballroom was watching this tableau with rapt attention. Hardened businessmen were blinking back tears, and more than one society matron was dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. The love between Michael and the twins was so pure, so genuine, that it made James's biological claim seem not just irrelevant but almost obscene. "I love you too, Daddy," both boys said simultaneously, and the words echoed through the silent room like a benediction. Michael looked up then, his gaze finding James across the room. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had just been given the greatest gift in the world. The unconditional love of children who had chosen him as their father. "You're right about one thing, James," he said, rising to his full height with the twins still pressed close to his sides. "They'll never be your real sons, because real sons are claimed by love, not biology. Real sons are raised by men who put their children's needs before their own pride. Real sons are protected and cherished and shown every day what it means to be a good man." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And by that definition, these boys have been my real sons from the moment I met them, just as I've been their real father from the moment they let me into their hearts." The applause that erupted was spontaneous and thunderous. Guest after guest rose to their feet, clapping not just for Michael's words but for the obvious love and unity of the family before them. "Dr." Gonzalez was crying openly, and even the waitstaff had stopped serving to witness the moment. James stood alone at the head table, surrounded by the ruins of his planned revenge. His own cruelty had been his undoing, exposing him as a man so consumed with bitterness that he would hurt innocent children to satisfy his need for control. The contrast between his petty vindictiveness and Michael's generous love was stark and damning. As the applause died down, Laura moved to join her family, wrapping her arms around Michael and the twins in an embrace that seemed to glow with happiness. When she looked up at James, there was no anger in her expression, only pity. "Thank you," she said simply, and the words carried clearly across the silent room. "For what?" James asked, his voice low and defeated. "For showing everyone here, including our sons, exactly what kind of man you really are," she replied. "And for proving beyond any doubt that we're exactly where we belong." She turned back to Michael, who was helping the twins smooth down their rumpled tuxedos with the patient care of a devoted father. "Shall we go home?" she asked softly. "I think we've made our point." But before they could move toward the exit, James's voice rang out one last time, raw with desperation and fury. "This isn't over, Laura," he shouted, abandoning all pretense of dignity. "You think you've won. But I know things about you. About your precious business. About where your success really came from. I could destroy everything you've built with one phone call." Michael's expression shifted then, the loving father disappearing to reveal the billionaire businessman who had built an empire through strategic thinking and careful planning. His smile was cold and sharp as a blade. "Actually, James," he said quietly, "I think you'll find that this is very much over. But if you'd like to discuss business dealings and where people's success really comes from, I'm sure my lawyers would be happy to have that conversation with you tonight. In fact, if you prefer." The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and James's face went white as he suddenly realized that he wasn't the only one in the room with secrets to hide. As the Evans family four, that's what they truly were, walked toward the exit with their heads held high. They left behind a room full of witnesses to the power of real love and the emptiness of petty revenge. James's plan had failed, not because of manipulation or wealth, but because he had underestimated the strength of a family built on genuine affection and mutual respect. The real victory wasn't in his humiliation. It was in the love that surrounded Laura and her children, protecting them from whatever poison he could spew. They were untouchable now, wrapped in a bond that no amount of bitterness could break. Chapter 8. The Perfect Storm. The ballroom had fallen into an uncomfortable silence as guests processed what they'd just witnessed. James Carter, successful businessman, respected philanthropist, pillar of the community, had just revealed himself to be a bitter, cruel man who would attack innocent children to satisfy his need for revenge. The contrast between his petty vindictiveness and the Evans family's obvious love was so stark that several guests were openly staring at their host with disgust. As Laura and her family moved toward the exit, their heads held high despite the emotional confrontation, James felt something inside him snap. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He was supposed to be triumphant, vindicated, proven right about Laura's worthlessness. Instead, he was standing alone in his own ballroom, surrounded by people who now saw him as exactly what he was, a man so consumed with bitterness that he would hurt children to ease his own pain. "You're not walking away from me," James snarled, moving quickly through the crowd before anyone could react. His desperation made him unpredictable, and he managed to reach Laura before security could intercept him. Laura felt his hand close around her arm before she saw him coming. His grip was tight, possessive, and for a moment she was transported back 3 years to the night he'd packed his bags, when his hands had left bruises on her wrists as he'd shaken her and told her she'd never amount to anything without him. But she wasn't that broken woman anymore. She pulled free with a strength that surprised them both, her dark eyes flashing with a fury that had been building for 3 years. "Don't you ever touch me again," she said, her voice low and deadly calm. The words carried clearly through the ballroom, and the guests closest to them audibly gasped at the obvious implication of past violence. Michael was beside her in 2 quick strides, his entire body radiating protective fury. But before he could say or do anything, two small figures stepped between James and their family. Ethan and Noah stood side by side, their 7-year-old faces set with a determination that would have been amusing if the situation weren't so serious. They looked impossibly small next to James's towering frame, but their stance was fearless, protective everything. Their biological father had never been. "Leave our mama alone," Ethan said, his young voice steady despite the tremor Laura could hear underneath. "She doesn't belong to you anymore." "She never belonged to you," Noah added, with the brutal honesty that only children could deliver. "Mama says people aren't things that other people can own. She belongs to herself, and she chooses to be with us because we love her right." James stared down at the two boys, his biological sons, the children he'd abandoned without a backward glance, and felt his world tilt on its axis. They were protecting the woman he'd tried to destroy, defending the man who'd replaced him, standing against their own biological father without hesitation or doubt. "Those aren't your children," James said to Michael, his voice cracking with desperation. "They're me blood, my sons, and I have rights." "No, you don't." Michael's voice cut through James's tirade like a blade, quiet, but carrying an authority that made the entire ballroom fall silent. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, his movements deliberate and controlled. "You signed away your parental rights 2 years ago," Michael continued, his dark eyes never leaving James's face, "when you decided that paying child support was too much of a burden and formally relinquished all legal claim to Ethan and Noah." The document fluttered to the floor between them, but its impact was seismic. Gasps echoed through the ballroom as the implications sank in. James hadn't just abandoned his children emotionally, he'd legally disowned them to avoid financial responsibility. "That's impossible," James stammered, but his face had gone white. "I never signed." "You signed it in your lawyer's office on the 15th of March, 2 years ago," Michael said relentlessly, "the same day you closed on your new penthouse. Apparently, you decided that your lifestyle was more important than your children's welfare." "Doctor." Gonzalez's hand flew to her mouth in horror, and Eleanor Wentworth actually recoiled from James as if he were something toxic. Around the room, the city's elite were processing the revelation that their host had abandoned his own children for money. "You had them investigated," Laura said quietly, understanding flooding her voice. "You knew about the papers." "I know about a lot of things," Michael replied, his gaze still fixed on James, "including the fact that the adoption papers were finalized 6 months ago. Ethan and Noah are legally my sons now, and there's nothing you can do to change that." The twins looked up at Michael with shining eyes, their hands reaching for his, as the reality of his words sank in. They were his sons, really and truly, in every way that mattered. But James wasn't finished. Cornered and desperate, he lashed out with the wild fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. "You think you've won?" he snarled, spittle flying from his lips as he pointed an accusing finger at Laura. "You think you can just waltz into my house and humiliate me in front of my friends?" "Your house?" Michael's smile was sharp and cold, carrying a promise of destruction that made several guests take unconscious steps backward. "That's interesting. Tell me, James, when exactly did you last make a mortgage payment on this property?" James's face went from white to gray. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you defaulted on your mortgage 6 months ago," Michael said conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather. "Something about overextending yourself on that penthouse purchase. If I recall correctly." The ballroom was dead silent now, the guests hanging on every word of this devastating revelation. "I'm talking about the fact that your creditors seized this property 4 months ago and put it up for auction," Michael continued. "And I'm talking about the fact that I bought it 3 months ago, before you sent that pathetic invitation to my fiancée." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. James swayed on his feet as the full implications hit him. "That's right, James," Michael said softly, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "You've been so focused on your petty revenge that you never read the fine print on your lease agreement. I've been your landlord for 3 months, and tonight I'm evicting you." Gasps and shocked murmurs erupted throughout the ballroom. The irony was exquisite and devastating. James had invited everyone to witness Laura's humiliation in a house he no longer owned, paid for by the man he'd tried to destroy. "You son of a bitch," James whispered, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You planned this, all of it." "I protected my family," Michael corrected calmly. "When you sent that invitation to Laura, I had my legal team run a standard background check, the same kind I do for any potential business threat. It wasn't difficult to discover that your empire is built on questionable foundations." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through several messages with deliberate precision. "Your construction permits are under review for safety violations. Your development loans are being called in by the banks due to missed payments. And apparently, the IRS has some questions about your foundation's tax filings." Each revelation hit James like a physical blow. His carefully constructed life was crumbling around him in real time, witnessed by everyone who mattered in his social and professional circles. "But the truly beautiful part," Michael said, his voice taking on a note of satisfaction that was both terrifying and thrilling, "is that none of this is revenge. It's just karma catching up with a man who thought he could build success on other people's suffering." James looked around the ballroom, desperately seeking some source of support or sympathy, but found only expressions of disgust and horror. His friends and colleagues were staring at him as if seeing him for the first time, and what they saw was ugly. "This isn't over," he said weakly, but even he could hear how hollow the threat sounded. "Yes, it is," Laura said quietly, stepping forward to stand beside Michael. "It's been over for a long time, James. I just needed to see it for myself." She looked around the ballroom, at the mansion where she'd once lived as a trapped, diminished version of herself, at the people who had witnessed her transformation from victim to victor, at the man who had tried to break her and failed so spectacularly. "Thank you," she said to James, her voice filled with genuine gratitude that clearly confused him, "for showing me exactly how far I've come, for proving that I don't need your approval or anyone else's to know my worth. And for demonstrating to our sons what kind of man they never want to become." The twins nodded solemnly, their small hands clasped tightly in Michael's as they watched their biological father's complete downfall. There was no joy in their expressions, only a kind of sad relief that the man who had hurt their mother so badly was finally powerless to hurt her again. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael announced to the room, his voice carrying the authority of the mansion's new owner, "I think this evening has reached its natural conclusion. Thank you for witnessing what happens when love triumphs over cruelty." As the guests began to file out, many stopping to congratulate Laura on her grace under pressure or to shake Michael's hand in admiration, James stood alone in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the wreckage of his reputation and his life. The Evans family walked toward the exit together, their heads held high, their bond stronger than ever. They had come to face Laura's past, and instead, they had secured their future. James's attempt at revenge had become the catalyst for their complete triumph and the foundation for a love story that would last the rest of their lives. Behind them, in the mansion that no longer belonged to him, James Carter finally understood the difference between power and strength, between control and love, between revenge and justice. The lesson had cost him everything. Chapter 9. The Ultimate Revelation. The ballroom felt different now, lighter somehow, as if James's exposed cruelty had been a toxic cloud that was finally dissipating. The guests who remained were no longer uncomfortable spectators to an ugly scene. They had become witnesses to something beautiful and profound. The transformation was remarkable. What had begun as James's planned humiliation had become a celebration of love triumphing over bitterness. As the Evans family moved toward the exit, Laura felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. This mansion had once been a prison where James had systematically destroyed her self-worth. Tonight, it had become the stage for her ultimate liberation, witnessed by the very people whose approval James had always craved. But then Michael stopped walking. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, "before we leave, there's something I need to do." Laura turned to look at him questioningly, and her breath caught at the expression on his face. There was love there, yes, but also something deeper, a sense of rightness, of destiny, as if this moment had been building toward something inevitable and perfect. "I know I already proposed," Michael said, his voice warm with tenderness as he gazed into her eyes. "And I know you already said yes, but that was private, just for us. This," he gestured to the ballroom around them, to the guests who were watching with growing curiosity and delight, This is where James tried to make you feel small and worthless 3 years ago. Understanding dawned in Laura's eyes, followed quickly by tears that had nothing to do with sadness. I want this to be where the world sees you exactly as you are, Michael continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Brilliant. Beautiful. Worthy of every good thing life has to offer. I want this to be where our love story conquers the place where your pain began. The remaining guests had stopped their exodus, drawn back by the obvious emotion in Michael's voice. Even the waitstaff had paused in their cleanup, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Michael dropped to one knee in the center of the ballroom, pulling the engagement ring from his pocket, the same ring Laura already wore. But this moment was different. This was a public declaration, a claiming, a statement to everyone present that this woman was cherished beyond measure. But first, Michael said, looking up at the twins, who were watching with wide, excited eyes, I need to ask the two most important men in your life for their permission. Ethan and Noah exchanged one of their wordless twin conversations before stepping forward solemnly, as if they understood the gravity of the moment. Ethan, Noah, Michael said formally, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. I love your mother more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. She makes me a better man every single day. But more than that, I love both of you as if you were born from my own heart. You are my sons in every way that matters, and I want to spend the rest of my life being the father you deserve. His voice grew thick with emotion as he continued. So I'm asking you, as the men who know her best and love her most, may I have your permission to marry your mother and become your family, officially and forever? The silence that followed was profound and beautiful. Dr. Gonzalez was crying openly, and Eleanor Wentworth had her hand pressed to her heart. Even the hardened businessmen in the crowd were blinking back tears at the sight of this powerful man kneeling before two children, asking for their blessing with such obvious love and respect. Ethan, always the more serious twin, considered the question with the gravity it deserved. Will you promise to love Mama, even when she's grumpy in the morning before she has coffee? A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, and Michael's smile was radiant. Every single day. And will you promise to help us with our science projects, even when they get really messy and might explode? Noah added, his eyes bright with mischief. Especially then, Michael promised solemnly. And will you promise to read us bedtime stories, even when we're too old for them? Ethan asked, his young voice betraying the depth of his need for security and love. Michael's voice was rough with emotion when he answered, I'll read you bedtime stories when you're 30 if you want me to. The twins looked at each other again, then back at their mother, who was crying tears of pure joy. Finally, they turned to Michael with identical expressions of love and trust. Yes, they said in unison, you can marry our mama. The applause that erupted was spontaneous and thunderous, but Michael only had eyes for Laura. He rose to his feet and took her left hand, sliding the engagement ring onto her finger with all the ceremony it deserved. Laura Bennett, he said, his voice carrying clearly over the applause, will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known? Yes, Laura whispered. Then louder, her voice ringing with joy and certainty. Yes, with all my heart. When Michael kissed her, it was with a passion and tenderness that made the entire ballroom sigh with satisfaction. This was what love looked like, not the twisted possessiveness James had called love, but something pure and strong and generous that lifted everyone it touched. The twins wrapped their arms around both their parents, and the image they created was so perfect, so radiantly happy, that several guests began applauding again. This wasn't just an engagement. It was a family being born, a love story reaching its perfect moment of triumph. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael announced as he broke the kiss, his arms still wrapped around his new fiancée and their children. I give you the future, Mrs. Evans and my sons, Ethan and Noah. The crowd erupted in celebration. Guests rushed forward to congratulate the family, to shake Michael's hand, to tell Laura how beautiful she looked, to compliment the twins on their poise and grace. The ballroom that had been filled with toxic tension 20 minutes earlier was now overflowing with joy and celebration. Dr. Gonzalez reached them first, tears streaming down her cheeks. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed, she said, embracing Laura warmly. Your children are remarkable. and you deserve every happiness." "They get their strength from their mother," Michael replied, his arm tightening around Laura's waist, "and their kindness from knowing they're unconditionally loved." Eleanor Wentworth was next, her usual social composure completely abandoned in favor of genuine emotion. "Mr. Evans, I've known a lot of wealthy men in my time, but I've never seen one who understood what true richness looks like until tonight." As the congratulations continued, the contrast with James's earlier behavior became even more stark. Where he had tried to diminish and humiliate, Michael elevated and celebrated. Where James had been possessive and cruel, Michael was generous and kind. The difference wasn't just in their treatment of Laura, it was in their fundamental understanding of what love actually meant. Across the ballroom, James stood forgotten and alone, watching the celebration of the family he had lost through his own cruelty. The woman he had tried to destroy was being celebrated as a bride-to-be. The children he had abandoned were being claimed by a man who understood their worth. The humiliation he had planned for others had become his own, complete and utter downfall. But even in his defeat, James couldn't quite grasp the lesson. He saw Michael's wealth, the guests' admiration, the family's obvious happiness, and he convinced himself it was all about money and social status. He couldn't understand that what he was witnessing was something money couldn't buy, the kind of love that transformed everyone it touched. "Mama," Ethan said quietly, tugging on Laura's dress to get her attention, "are we going to live in this big house now?" "No, sweetheart," Laura replied, kneeling down to his level. "This house has too many sad memories. We're going to stay in our real home, where we make pancakes on Sunday mornings and read stories by the fireplace." "Good," Noah said decisively. "This house is pretty, but it doesn't feel like love lives here." Out of the mouths of babes, the 7-year-old had articulated something the adults in the room were only beginning to understand, that a home wasn't about grandeur or expense, but about the love that filled it. Michael overheard the exchange and felt his heart swell with pride and affection for these incredible children who had taught him more about what mattered than all his business successes combined. "Although," he said thoughtfully, a mischievous glint in his eye, "we might want to consider getting a bigger house soon. I have a feeling our family might be growing in the future." Laura blushed beautifully at the implication, and the twins looked excited at the prospect of siblings. Even in the midst of their triumph, they were already looking forward to the future they would build together. As the evening wound down, and the last guests offered their congratulations before departing, the Evans family found themselves alone in the ballroom that had witnessed their ultimate victory. James had disappeared at some point, slinking away like the coward he'd always been underneath his bravado. "Are you ready to go home?" Michael asked, gathering his family close. "More than ready," Laura replied, looking around the mansion one last time. "I never want to see this place again." "Actually," Michael said with a smile that held promises of wonderful surprises, "I have plans for this house. I'm thinking it would make an excellent community center, maybe with an architectural school attached, where talented designers can learn to create homes that truly serve the people who live in them." Laura's eyes filled with tears again at the beautiful irony. The mansion where James had tried to break her spirit would become a place where other architects learned to build with love and purpose. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying all the weight of gratitude and amazement and deep, abiding love. "I love you too," Michael replied. "All of you, forever." As they walked out of the mansion together, the twins chattering excitedly about wedding plans and whether they could have cake for breakfast tomorrow, Laura realized that revenge had never been the goal. The goal had been love, finding it, keeping it, protecting it, and letting it transform everything it touched. James's cruelty had been defeated, not by matching it, but by rising above it. His attempt to prove Laura's worthlessness had instead showcased her incredible value. His plan to humiliate her had become the stage for the most beautiful love story any of the guests had ever witnessed. And in the end, that was the most devastating defeat of all. Chapter 10. Crown of Victory. 1 year later, the same mansion that had once been the stage for James's planned humiliation now glowed with warmth and celebration, transformed by love into something entirely different. White roses and gardenias cascaded from every surface, their sweet fragrance mingling with the sound of laughter and joy. The ballroom where Laura had once faced her tormentor was now filled with family and friends, gathered to celebrate her marriage to Michaela wedding reception that felt more like a coronation of love's ultimate victory over cruelty. Laura stood near the French doors leading to the garden, her wedding dress a masterpiece of elegant simplicity that made her look like a goddess carved from starlight. The gown flowed around her like liquid silk, and the antique pearl necklace that had belonged to Michael's grandmother caught the light from the chandeliers overhead. She was radiant with happiness, her dark eyes sparkling as she watched her new husband dance with their sons. 9-year-old Ethan and Noah, resplendent in matching junior tuxedos, were standing on Michael's feet as he waltzed them around the dance floor. Their giggles echoed through the ballroom, pure and joyful, while wedding guests looked on with tears in their eyes. This was what family looked like, not the cold formality of James's world, but something warm and real and infinitely precious. Mrs. Evans. The name still sent shivers of delight down Laura's spine. She turned to find Dr. Maria Gonzalez approaching with a champagne flute and a smile that radiated genuine affection. "I still can't quite believe it," Laura admitted, accepting the glass gratefully. "A year ago, I was terrified to even be in this house. Now it's our home." "And what a transformation you've made," Maria replied, gesturing around the space. "I heard about your plans to turn the East Wing into a community architecture center. It's brilliant, exactly what this neighborhood needs." "Michael's idea, actually," Laura said, her voice soft with love as she watched her husband spin their boys in gentle circles. "He said the house needed to be filled with creativity and dreams instead of bitterness and revenge." The past year had been a whirlwind of change and growth. True to his word, Michael had transformed the mansion into their family home while preserving its grandest spaces for community use. The East Wing now housed a state-of-the-art architectural program where young designers learned to create affordable, sustainable housing. The gardens had been open to the public, with playgrounds and community spaces that brought families together rather than keeping them apart. James's former sanctuary had become a beacon of hope and opportunity, exactly the opposite of everything he'd represented. "Mama," Noah's voice broke through her reverie as he came racing across the dance floor, his bow tie askew and his hair charmingly mussed. "It's time for our speech." "Our speech?" Laura asked, though she was already moving toward the small stage where a microphone waited. "Ethan and I wrote something," Noah explained importantly. "Daddy Michael helped us practice, but the words are all ours." Laura felt her heart melt as Michael approached with Ethan in tow, both of them grinning with barely contained excitement. Her husband looked devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, but it was the love in his dark eyes that took her breath away. "Ready for this?" he asked softly, his hand finding hers as they climbed the steps to the stage together. "With you, I'm ready for anything," she replied, and meant it completely. The crowd quieted as Michael tapped the microphone, his presence commanding attention without effort. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue celebrating, Ethan and Noah have something they'd like to share." The twins stepped up to the microphone with the kind of solemn determination that only children could muster. Ethan, always the more serious of the two, spoke first. "We wanted to thank everyone for coming to celebrate our family," he began, his young voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "A year ago, we didn't really understand what was happening when we came to this house. We just knew that someone was being mean to our mama, and we didn't like it. But then our daddy protected us," Noah continued, his eyes shining with adoration as he looked at Michael. "Not just that night, but every day since. He shows us how to be good men by being the best man we know." Laura felt tears threatening as she listened to her their son speak with such wisdom and love. "Some people think that daddies are just about biology," Ethan said, the word biology carefully pronounced as if he'd been practicing. "But we know that real daddies are about choice. Our daddy chose us, and we chose him, and that makes us a real family, the best kind of family," Noah added emphatically, "because when you choose each other, it means the love is extra strong." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word from these remarkable children. "So we want to say, thank you, Daddy Michael," both boys said in unison, turning to face their father with expressions of pure love. "Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for making Mama happy every day. Thank you for showing us that good men protect the people they love instead of hurting them." Michael's composure cracked completely. He dropped to his knees and gathered both boys into his arms, his own eyes wet with tears as he held them close. "Thank you for teaching me what it really means to be a father," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You two are the greatest gift I've ever received." The applause was thunderous, but it was nearly drowned out by a commotion at the ballroom's entrance. Security guards were struggling with someone trying to force his way inside, and Laura's blood ran cold as she recognized the voice, shouting obscenities. James. He looked terrible unshaven, his clothes wrinkled and stained, his hair unkempt. The past year had not been kind to him. His business empire had collapsed under investigation. His reputation was in ruins, and his former friends crossed the street to avoid him. But apparently, his bitterness remained undimmed. "You think you've won?" he screamed, fighting against the security guards holding him back. "You think you can just steal my life and live happily ever after?" Michael stood slowly, his expression deadly calm as he stepped protectively in front of his family. "Call the police," he said quietly to one of the security guards. "Mr. Carter is violating his restraining order." "This is my house," James shrieked, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "My life, my children." "No," Ethan said firmly, stepping beside Michael with his chin raised proudly. "This is our house now, our family, our life. And you're not our daddy." Noah added with the brutal honesty of childhood, "You never were. Daddies don't abandon their children. Daddy don't hurt people. Daddies don't try to ruin their children's happiness." The contrast was devastating. James, disheveled and ranting, looked like exactly what he was, a man consumed by bitterness and rage. Meanwhile, the Evans family stood together in elegant unity, their love for each other visible and unshakable. "Actually, James," Michael said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than the man's complete breakdown, "there's something I never told you about how this all began." The police had arrived and were moving to arrest James, but Michael held up a hand to pause them. He wanted James to hear this. "I first saw Laura 3 years ago," Michael continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, "at one of your parties. Actually, you were introducing her to someone as your little wife who thinks she's an architect. And I watched you humiliate her in front of a room full of people." Laura's breath caught. She remembered that night tone of the worst of her marriage when James had systematically destroyed her confidence in front of his business associates. "I fell in love with her strength that night," Michael said simply, "the way she held her head high despite your cruelty, the way she refused to let you break her spirit, even when you were trying your hardest. I spent the next 2 years positioning myself to help her when she finally found the courage to leave you." The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd. Michael hadn't just fallen in love with Laura after her divorce. He'd been planning her protection and James's downfall for years. "Every business deal that went wrong for you after that night, every door that closed in your face, it wasn't all connected to me, James. Most of it was just karma catching up with your own bad decisions. But I did make sure that when you finally pushed too far, when you tried to hurt the woman I loved, there would be consequences." James's face went white as the full implications hit him. His downfall hadn't been random or the result of bad luck. It had been orchestrated by a man who'd spent years systematically dismantling his empire as punishment for his cruelty. "So yes," Michael concluded, his arm tightening around Laura's waist as the police finally moved to arrest James. "I stole your life. And I'd do it again without hesitation, because you never deserved any of it." As James was led away in handcuffs, still screaming threats and accusations, the wedding guests erupted in applause. But the Evans family barely noticed. They were wrapped in each other's arms, whole and complete and untouchable. "Is it finally over?" Laura asked quietly, watching James disappear through the ballroom doors. "It was over the moment you said yes to marrying me," Michael replied, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "Everything else was just details." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration and joy. The twins charmed every guest with their precocious observations about love and family. The dinner was perfect, the cake was demolished with appropriate ceremony, and the dancing continued long into the night. But finally, as the last guest departed and the twins were tucked into bed in their rooms in the mansion's family wing, Michael and Laura found themselves alone in the master suite, the same room where James had once plotted his petty cruelties, now transformed into a sanctuary of love and beauty. "Come here, Mrs. Evans," Michael said softly, his voice rough with desire and love as he pulled her into his arms. "I love the sound of that," Laura murmured against his lips as he kissed her with a passion that spoke of years of patience, finally rewarded. Their lovemaking was different that night, not just the physical expression of desire, but a claiming, a celebration, a consecration of everything they'd built together. In the bed where James had once slept alone, while his wife cried herself to sleep in the guest room, Michael and Laura created something beautiful and sacred. "I love you," Laura whispered afterward, her head pillowed on Michael's chest as moonlight streamed through the windows. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "Thank you for letting me love you," Michael replied, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Thank you for giving me a family worth protecting." Outside their window, the gardens they'd created together bloomed in the darkness, and in the rooms down the hall, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. The mansion that had once been a monument to cruelty had become a testament to love's power to transform everything it touched. James's attempt at revenge had become the foundation for the greatest love story any of them had ever lived. And in the master bedroom, where it had all come full circle, Mr. and Mrs. Evans fell asleep in each other's arms.